Kill her. Kill her. That voice seemed to have a magical power to control his actions. It echoed in James' head, urging him to kill the woman in front of him, who was his wife. Although James clearly recognized her as Mary. But James' hand seemed to be controlled by someone else, unable to resist. Chapter 5: Cleaning. Upon returning to Chicago, the bustling atmosphere of the streets made Mary feel much more at ease compared to the eerie silence of that mansion in Houston. Despite just 2 days ago, she had thought living there was truly wonderful. A series of strange events were occurring that made a sensitive woman like Mary perceive the danger. As always, we blame women for overthinking, or being afraid of things they cannot see or be certain of. However, in terms of intuition, women are always more accurate than men. A man can be indifferent to everything around him, but if it were a woman, she would think in many different directions. That is the instinct of every woman who knows how to take care of her family. When she made the temporary decision to leave the mansion and return to Chicago, Mary felt as if she had shed an invisible burden weighing on her mind. Upon arriving home, the couple opened the door and entered. Almost the entire week, no one had been in this house, as the entire family had gone to Houston. However, it still emitted a warm and familiar atmosphere as usual. It is true that no matter where we go, it is not the same as being in our own home. Seeing his wife standing still, James asked, "We've only been away from this place for a few days and you already miss it to the point of being lost. I thought you used to complain about the noise in this city." Mary turned back to look at James and smiled. "I don't know why, but naturally, I now find this noise enjoyable, my love. It's like there are always people around, and I feel safer than in there, where sometimes it becomes terrifyingly quiet." James sighed. "Indeed, women, you change so quickly. People out there want to find a quiet place but can't, and now you like the noise. So, aren't you planning not to return to that house?" Mary remained silent, then she said, "I don't have them. It's just that these past few days, being away from home, I feel a bit uneasy. And it would be best if you took our son to wash his face and get ready for bed. It's getting late, it's almost 11 p.m. James carried some of his wife's belongings into the house, then returned to pick up their son sitting at the door. He saw Long holding 2 dirty dolls, the same dolls that were found in the basement yesterday. James scolded Mary. "Why did you bring these 2 dolls home? They look dirty and disgusting." Mary asked her husband in surprise. "What dolls? I didn't bring any toys from that mansion." Mary turned her eyes to her son. The little boy was holding 1 doll in each hand, laughing happily. Mary ran to take them away, but he started crying loudly. It was late at night, so Mary had to give them back to her son so that he would stop crying. Mary turned to her husband and asked, "I remember I didn't bring them into the car. You didn't bring them either. When I was carrying our son, he wasn't holding anything. How come there are 2 dolls here? They look so creepy." James was tired, the little boy was crying, so James turned to his wife and said, "First, it's possible that you didn't notice and they got mixed up in the bags. Second, maybe our son liked them, so he took them into the car. It was dark, so we didn't notice. But the doll run to the car by itself. And I don't understand why our son likes those 2 dolls. He has been playing with them since yesterday, but hasn't been naughty with other things like usual. Just ignore it, later you can clean them up. Now I'll take the boy to take a bath. You should unpack your things." Mary nodded and continued to move the rest of the luggage into the house. James carried Long into the bathroom and coaxed him. "Leave the dolls on this table. I'll wash your face, then you can play with them." Long obediently nodded. After finishing washing his face, James carried Long into the bedroom. He carefully tucked him in and noticed that Long fell asleep after just a moment, so James gently left the room. Mary was sitting on the sofa, looking at the two dolls with a worried expression. James placed his hand on Mary's shoulder, causing her to startle. Turning back, Mary said, "Why do I feel like these dolls don't look normal no matter how much I clean them? Look at this. I've wiped them several times, but there are still some brown stains that won't come off. Should I throw them away tomorrow and buy a different toy for our son?" James looked at his wife and smiled. Toys that have been in the basement for a long time getting dirty is normal. I was actually planning to throw them away earlier, but Long likes them too much. I'm afraid he'll cry if I get rid of them, so I decided to keep them. You can do whatever you want, but tomorrow when our parents come here, Long will forget about those dolls right away. Kids only like something for a short while. And now it's getting late, let's go to bed. Today, it's your turn to pamper me. Although she was quite tired, Mary understood her husband's personality, so she was also happy. She put the two dolls on the table and went to the bedroom with her husband. The couple was being intimate when suddenly Mary moaned, "Gently, please. I'm feeling a bit sore." Not only did James not respond, but he also became more violent. Mary couldn't bear the pain anymore and pushed her husband away. But James's strong arms tightly held onto Mary's shoulders, not allowing her to struggle. Seeing her husband's aggressive behavior, Mary put all her strength into her legs, trying to push him away, but the more she tried, the more she suffered. Suddenly, James raised his hand and squeezed his wife's throat, his grip tightening, making it difficult for Mary to breathe. Mary desperately tried to raise her hand and slapped James hard in the face. After that powerful slap, James seemed to wake up, startled, and quickly backed away. James raised his hands, which had just been choking his wife, and looked at her with fear. Mary sat up, quickly retreating into the corner of the bed, looking at her husband in horror. James reached out to apologize to his wife, but Mary shouted, "Get out." Mary spoke and cried, causing her voice to become hoarse. Just a moment ago, she almost died from her own husband choking her. Terrified, Mary could only curl up in the small corner of the bed, tears streaming down her face. James continued to apologize to his wife because he didn't understand why he had done such a thing. He looked at his remorseful wife, put on his clothes, and left the living room. Fearing something, Mary grabbed her clothes and ran to Long's room, locking the door. The whole house fell silent, and the clock struck midnight. In the room, Mary held her child, crying uncontrollably. Outside the living room, James was still tormenting himself. What strange thing made James want to kill his own wife? But one thing James knew for sure was that when he raised his hand to choke his wife, he heard a girl's voice whispering in his ear with cold words. "Kill her. Kill her." That voice seemed to have a magical power to control his actions. It echoed in James' head, urging him to kill the woman in front of him, who was his wife. Although James clearly recognized her as Mary. But James' hand seemed to be controlled by someone else, unable to resist. He began to remember what his wife had said in the past few days, and now those things made James' hair stand on end. James was startled when he remembered the first morning in the mansion. That morning, James was sleeping when suddenly he felt someone caressing his body, not stopping there. It made him feel more and more pleasure and satisfaction. At that time, James wanted to open his eyes but couldn't, so he had to close his eyes and enjoy the pleasure. So when Mary came in and called James to wake up, James looked at his wife and laughed mischievously. At that moment, Mary insisted that she didn't understand anything, but James thought that Mary was a virtuous woman, so she hesitated to mention that matter. And that dream made James wet his pants this afternoon. The noises that James ignored, but frightened Mary. As if remembering something, James ran back to knock on the door of the room and called his wife. "Mary. I'm sorry, I have something to ask you." Of course, Mary didn't want to talk to her husband at that time. Mary remained silent without answering, and James didn't dare to ask anything else, but silently returned to the living room. Because he was living in the age of information technology, James didn't believe in ghost stories before, but today he almost killed his wife, so he understood best whether it was real or not. James went online to search for the symptoms he had just experienced. The results mostly said that it was a sign when he was being followed by a lost soul or possessed by a demon. Swallowing his saliva, James suddenly felt the air around him becoming unusually cold. Every corner of the house now gave off a terrifying feeling. I don't know if it was the search results on the internet that made James feel scared or not. But now, right in the living room, James feels a very cold breath passing by his ear. It's as cold as ice. For the first time in James' life, he feels his body stiffening, unable to move. The breath gets stronger. It seems to be getting closer to James' ear and saying something very slowly. Your whole family will have to die. The voice echoes as if from a distant hell. It resonates near the ear but echoes throughout the house. Something feels heavy on James' shoulders, but he can't turn around to see what it is. James only knows that there is a girl's hand with pale skin. The sleeve is torn and tattered, resting on his shoulder. That hand terrifies James. Suddenly, the hand disappears, and only the heavy footsteps going up the stairs to the second floor remain. When no more sound is heard, James can finally move. His body is cold, but the sweat keeps pouring out, making him wet all over. Inside the house, a desperate scream echoes. James! Save me! It is Mary's desperate scream. In the room of their child, something seems to have happened. Although he can hear his wife clearly, it takes James a few seconds to regain his senses. Running back to his son's room, James twists the doorknob, but it won't open because the door is locked from the inside. Banging on the door, James calls his wife. Mary, open the door for me. What's happening inside? Open the door. In response to James banging on the door, there are Mary's desperate screams, but the door still won't open. James hurriedly goes to find the key. A moment later, although James gets the key and tries to insert it into the lock, he can't turn the key to open the door. Save me, save me. The cries for help were lost in the distorted voice, as if someone was choking her. Unable to bear it any longer, James grabbed the fire extinguisher, which was placed in the corner near the entrance. He decided to break down the door. The door was hit so hard that the doorknob flew off, and only then did it open. James rushed into the room and hugged his wife. At this moment, Mary was huddled in a corner, trembling. At 1 a.m., the house became extremely terrifying. Mary sat huddled, leaning against the wall, her eyes fixed on her son's wardrobe. One hand tightly held her husband, while the other pointed towards the wardrobe, and she stammered. It's in there, but has no head. James looked in the direction his wife was pointing, and opposite them was the wardrobe. At this moment, the wardrobe showed no signs of anything unusual. But clearly, something must have been there for Mary to be this frightened. The room light was now on, as James was too worried about his wife, and Mary was too scared, so neither of them noticed that something even more terrifying was happening right next to them. When did Long wake up? Maybe the screams and banging on the door woke him up. But this child did not cry or feel scared. On the contrary, it sat cross-legged and held two dolls. No one knew when the child took them from the table outside the living room. But it sat there, holding the dolls, its hand pointing towards its mother and father, and its mouth laughing eerily. The laughter made the couple feel horrified. It was not the laughter of a normal child. It was the sinister laughter of someone who had existed for nearly 100 years. And what was even more terrifying was that when it laughed, its mouth widened, but its eyes did not squint. They even widened, staring intently at its own parents. While they were worried about what was happening to the child, both of them were startled because, at this very moment, the wardrobe was emitting creeping sounds. Like something scratching the inside of the cabinet, creating spine-chilling sounds. The cabinet door slowly opened, as if someone inside wanted to look outside, then suddenly slammed shut. James and his wife held onto each other tightly, trembling. Only their son found joy in these strange occurrences. Suddenly, Long collapsed onto the bed, and James quickly pulled his son back, shaking him. The little boy was still breathing, just unconscious. The whole house fell silent in fear. At 3 a.m., the family of 3 sat huddled together, afraid to leave. James knew that his family's life from now on would have to face a terrifying thing that he had always underestimated and seemed indifferent to whenever someone mentioned it.